Father Hans, welcome to the Orthodox Bill podcast. How are you doing today, Father?
I'm good, and I'm glad to be here.
It's a true pleasure. Like I said earlier, thank you so much for your time. It is really humbling to be able to speak to you. Um, Father, usually what I ask some of our guests is if they can give us a brief intro, but also I would love to hear a little bit more about the St. Paisios Brotherhood. What prompted you to start that or be a part of that? And then we can, take the conversation from there if that's okay.
Okay, brief bio. I've been a priest for 30 plus years. I lose count. I serve at St. Peter's Orthodox Church in Fort Myers, Florida. I've been down in Florida for about 24 years. I'm originally from Minnesota, and I love the warm winters. Never get tired of that. It's very good, and we're doing well down here. Okay, St. Paisios Brotherhood. Um, about, I would say it's probably 12 years ago now. There was young men started entering my life. Okay. And most of them are what I would call in lockdown, emotional lockdown. It's a big problem. That's my term for it. Right. And, but they have radical encounters with Christ. Okay. I'm speaking generally now over the last 12 years. It's been my experience. But this young man, I really love this young man. And, he struggled with what all guys struggle with, the PMO. That stands for porn, masturbation, orgasm. Okay, we borrowed that from the manosphere. Weed, the usual stuff. Okay, um, and in working with him, I started to learn a lot, especially how to get over the PMO, which is a big issue. Okay, and nobody really knows what to do. Um, but I discovered a few things. I can go into detail later about that if you want. And then, just other men just started coming into my life, and I knew it was God bringing them to me, and I had to learn how to do this and all that, and it worked. It really worked. And so this was, unbeknownst to me at that time, this was something that would grow much larger, but I didn't realize it. I did that for about 3, 4 years, and then a friend of mine, Father Patrick Henry Reardon, heard about what I'm doing and invited me to speak at a conference he was holding for Touchstone magazine. The conference was called Restoring Patriarchy. And I spoke. And what I wrote up was a talk called Pastoring Young Men into Manhood. And I was the last speaker on Friday night, so I didn't hear any of the reaction to what I said, but I did the next day. And the reaction was just overwhelmingly positive from all the speakers. They ended up putting my talk, they highlighted that on their website. Okay. I had no idea of how powerful this was until I got that reaction. I just had no idea. I just kind of learned it and was doing it down here. And that was the first indication that I had something really powerful here by that reaction. And so in putting that video up on their website, everything was behind a paywall except that video. That video took off on a slow viral. And then men from all over the country started calling me up. Just from all over. They found my number, started calling me up. So I was doing a lot of talking to guys on the phone. It got to be almost unmanageable. I was doing this just a lot. And then I got a visit. I got a call from a priest and a deacon, and they said, "We want to come and see you." And they came down and we spent the afternoon talking about, young men and their issues and all that. And they wanted me to start up an organization. And I was very reluctant to do that. And because I've started other things before, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. And what I did know was that it was going to be a ton of work because these things always are, as you know, because you're starting up a podcast program, you're developing a channel for yourself, correct? It's a lot of work, isn't it? It's a whole
It's
lot.
a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole
Two
lot.
years in the making.
Yeah, yeah. Anything successful takes a lot of work. And success never comes easy, but it does come. Okay. And I thought, man, I've got a parish. I had started a parish down here and it was growing and, that took a lot of time and everything like that. Meanwhile, um, I went to Greece and I met a friend there, and the friend's name, he's Father Amphilochios now, but at that time he was Dimitri. And Dimitri was the spiritual son of Elder Paisios. Elder Paisios was real active in our parish about 6 years. He's active now, but really in a dramatic way. When a man in my parish, 23-year-old man, had a car accident and a traumatic brain injury. And I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. He was Facebook friends with Dimitri. And when Dimitri heard about the accident, um, he got in contact with me and told me Elder Paisios has healed a lot of young men in Greece from car accidents, motorcycle accidents, that kind of thing. And I said, "Well, tell me what to do." Okay. And he told me what to do, and we witnessed a miracle here. It's on our website. Okay. We witnessed a miracle. And the extent of his injuries was such that 95% of people who have them die. And the other 5%, another doctor told me, are institutionalized for the rest of their life. But this man had a healing. Okay. And that introduced me to St. Paisios, Elder Paisios at the time, but also Dimitri. So I went to Greece. I finally met Dimitri. And Dimitri and I went around and visited different monasteries. And he was my guide. And we went into one monastery, and this really happened. This really happened. Um, the elder of the monastery, the Yerunda, I didn't know he was. I found out later. He sees me walk in and he walks up to me and he says, "You will lead many young men in America into the Orthodox Church, and Elder Paisios and the Theotokos are going before you." And then he walked away. Okay, and then he walked away. That went right through me. That went right through me. I only understood about half of it because he spoke his Greek really fast, right? But Dimitri told me what he said, and then I realized, oh, I got to start this up. This is my answer. I got to start it up. Came back to America, called the guys. I said, we're starting it up. And that was the beginning of St. Paisios Brotherhood. That's how it started.
That's that's fascinating. Um, One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Father, is in working with so many young men. Obviously, porn is one of those things that seems to be very prevalent. But what other issues have you noticed that are very common amongst a lot of the young men that you work with?
Trauma, trauma, lot of childhood trauma. Okay. What do I mean by trauma? Look at the culture is so fractured. The culture is so fractured that the connections necessary to keep a man stable and sound and healthy, those connections are fractured. When those connections are fractured, the young man, the boy, he experiences things that he just cannot process. And these experiences are deep, they're painful, and they actually get lodged in the memory and they harm the soul. Okay. And so there's a lot of that, a whole lot of that. And so that's one thing. The guys are really troubled, but they're troubled because of the things that happen to them, often in childhood. And those, it leads to behaviors. I mean, not sometimes, traumas behind the PMO addiction becomes compulsive. And in order to heal the addiction, you have to heal the compulsion first behind it. That's increasingly common. Um, Another one is loneliness. Loneliness is huge. Guys just grow up lonely. And what's lost here is the notion of real um, affection between men. Affection between men. Men are afraid to experience and express love. And a lot of that is, this is uncomfortable to say, but a lot of that is because of, the homosexual juggernaut and the homosexual lobby. I'm not talking about guys who struggle with same-sex attraction. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking about the politicization of homosexuality that defines all male affection as homosexual. Well, guys don't want to become homosexual. They just don't. Okay. Even the gay guys I know who are in it don't really want to be in it. All right. And but because they've kind of claimed the moral language and the moral ground, guys are reluctant to have close, intimate relationships with other men. Even as I say this, I mean, it is so prevailing. The cultural consensus is so prevalent that when I say this, automatically you think, oh, that's gay. But it's not. It's not. You know, the one of the founding principles of the Brotherhood is that men learn how to become a man from other men. And what I've also learned in my ministry to young men is that the healing grace of God, the grace that brings healing to men, usually comes in through the love of another man. Now, in an ideal world, you know, the boy grows up to a man to become a man when he has a male mentor, preferably the father. But a lot of guys just, you know, they come from divorced families, and so the father wasn't there. In many other cases, and I think there's a historical reason for this. I can go into that some other time. But in other cases, the fathers don't know how to father because they haven't been properly fathered. And so basically, the boy grows up as an emotional orphan. And if you grow up as an emotional orphan, if you don't have the intimate emotional relationship with an adult man, if you don't experience paternal love, you grow up with a deficit, and that deficit affects the man psychologically and spiritually because he doesn't feel adequate. He doesn't feel adequate. So a lot of guys have deep feelings of inadequacy, and they don't know how to heal them. They think they're ashamed of it, and they think that something is wrong with it, so they never talk about it. Okay, so that's another big problem of the loneliness, the sense of inadequacy, the lack of they call it role models. What it is the lack of real meaningful relationships with other men. Now, the beautiful thing about this is it can be healed. It can be healed. And what I've learned is you know the power of real heartfelt relationships between man to man, because that relationship becomes a conduit through which God's healing grace flows. And all I really have to do is articulate that, right? And show men that it's there. Because what I'm describing is what I call the ontological structure of reality. It's the way God really made it, right? And when we live in deep reality, ontological reality, when we live according to God's grand design, to quote Saint Ephrem the Syrian, the healing comes. The healing comes, and that healing is our salvation. That's the thing. This is what's so beautiful about Orthodoxy and Orthodox anthropology in particular. Salvation is the redemption of the fallen Adam. We are all children of the fallen Adam, and we share in the brokenness that resulted when Adam fell. Okay? But now we have the second Adam, Jesus Christ, and we are baptized into him, and that's then the journey of redemption. And what's that journey of redemption? It's the journey into full personhood, and for men, the journey into full manhood, as it is for women, the journey into full womanhood. And that's a journey of healing, redemption, restoration. And the culture is such that it fragments the person. It fragments men. There's a lot of ways to define it. The easiest way is to define it politically, you know, the war against the male and all that stuff. And all that's true. And it's very helpful descriptively, but not therapeutically. Okay? Therapeutically, therapia, the Greek word, is really healing, medicine for the soul. And so in the Brotherhood, we learn as we go. I'm learning a lot. We learn as we go, but in the establishing of these brotherhoods, and speaking of the things that I'm speaking of here, men begin to experience that healing. It's really quite beautiful. It really is beautiful to see. And the thing is, the guys respond to it. They respond to it. A lot of men are coming into our churches, like thousands. It looks like that the next phase is going to be, and that first phase is not going to stop, but the next phase will be young married couples. We're seeing that now. They come in they intuitively know that the healing they're looking for is going to be found in the Orthodox Church. Now, they can't articulate that, okay? Not yet, okay? But once they begin experiencing it, they can, because the intuition crystallizes into concept. And as soon as that happens, you can speak about it, right? And so we have to well, that's what that's what we have to do, is we have to facilitate that healing, and as we do it, we experience our own as well. This is very exciting stuff, and profoundly meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, and I think obviously the consequences of that permeate all aspects of society, right? As you're saying that, I'm kind of thinking about back to my own experience shortly after the passing of my father when I was around, I think I was 22, and I was having sort of a crisis, like I said, very similar to what you've described, where I felt very lonely,
Mm,
very inadequate, and very confused,
yeah.
mainly because I didn't understand what it meant to be a man,
Mhm.
having grown up in a very secularized family, and also having not having the example as you're mentioning of that sort of I had unconditional love, but I don't think I had the love that I've experienced by going into the church, which is to say that there is I'm really struggling to describe this, but it almost feels like you feel protected and nurtured in not in a way that you would get obviously from your mother, but it's a protection, and it's a toughness that is all fueled by love. And that's the other question I want to ask you. What does that transition usually look like from somebody to go from a boy to a man? And what does it take from that mentor, from that father, to help shepherd them into that? I can imagine that there's an aspect of, maybe adding a little bit of pressure to them to make them a little bit tougher, right, and to turn them into more responsible men. But how do you sort of combine that, or find the balance between that and also having the emotional connection that you've described?
Okay, it's a really good question, and it's multifaceted. So let's start at the beginning. When brotherhood is formed, when a man risks sharing his life, his inner life with a brother, okay? And that's a gradual incremental process. Everything is progress only happens one step at a time. And he's willing to receive the love of the brother, okay? Then he is being fathered, okay? Now you said you came into the church and you felt a security. You felt a security. Okay. The love between brothers is paternal because we're men. The character of male love is paternal. It's fatherly. So even if a man doesn't know the love of a father, he still experiences paternal love through his brother. And paternal love is always healing. It's always healing. Love is an energy. It really is. But it's an energy with character, personal character. Okay? So it's not just amorphous energy. It has personal character, and all love comes from God because God is love. So when you're loving your brother, you're bringing healing to your brother just by the nature of the love that is being shared. Okay? This is why you felt something, and something happened to you when you came into the church and you embraced the church is mother, but through the but it's also father. Okay, the mother's the womb, the father's the dynamic energy, the dynamic creative energy. Okay, um, that analogy is very broad. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want people to start dissecting that and diagramming it, because it's not going to work if you do that. Okay, and but um and and once it establishes trust, it establishes trust. Inside that matrix of trust, the man can risk and the man can receive instruction, because he knows that the one giving to him, and number one, is not lying to him, and it's not a threat. All right? It's not a threat. Um, the inadequacy thing, I always tell guys, I run a course. It's called ASI, Achieving Sexual Integrity, and it's really helped guys get off the PMO thing. Okay, bring healing to that. And I know that they all feel inadequate, because that's just one of the spiritual maladies of the age. All men do. Okay. But I tell them, the very fact that you feel inadequate tells me that below that and behind that, there's the knowledge of adequacy. If that wasn't there, you wouldn't feel inadequate. You'd feel just okay. Okay, but you don't feel okay. Okay, so that means that there's potential there that has to come up. All right? That has to come up. And so we're talking about the development of self-confidence. We're talking about the increase of self-knowledge. Um, you know, I tell guys, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Okay, and there's nobody who's like you, so just learn to be you, right? And people will like you. You're going to be surprised. People will really like you as you are, and you will start feeling a freedom, and your creativity will begin to flourish. Now,
One of the
nothing
things,
real. I just had a thought. Tell me if this
sure, sure.
is true. Here you are, building something new. Where did that come from?
I have, well, I mean, I know now that it is from God. I kept having thoughts of being behind a microphone, and then I bought one, and then I'm like, what if I talk to somebody? And then I invited somebody, and it just kind of transitioned on that way. Um, but for me, it's been a very interesting journey, because I did not start speaking about Orthodoxy. I started more on like New Age, sort of very spiritually demonic, I would say, topics, which back then I thought were, very, I don't know, innovative or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've gone through that, at the same time, my life started to fall apart as I was going through that.
Okay.
And once my life completely shattered, I realized that the reason why it shattered was entirely my doing. And the reason why it was my doing, because I was lacking something that I was looking for ever since I was a child, that I didn't know was there. That sort of feeling of emptiness and despair that I thought was just something I just had to deal with. And then once my life did fall apart, um, I recognized that I was missing. I mean, ultimately, a father, even though I had one, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's actually something that I wanted to ask you also, because I have a younger brother, and I see the impact of video games, and I see the impact of pornography as I had the same impact.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed also is that I don't know if the pornography and the video games are the disease, or if they are the side, or if they're if they're the symptom, or the root of the disease, if that makes sense. And that's what I wanted to ask you. What is the root of that? Is it that it's just so easily accessible? Is it that, just the culture has been changing in such a way that we think it's normal? Or is it something within ourselves?
It's the lack of real spiritual knowledge and experience. Okay, because that's the only thing that can gratify the soul. That's the only thing that can gratify the soul. And so what happens is we start looking for these things in other ways. Okay, so let's take the PMO thing. Okay, what did I discover? I discovered that the what really drives PMO is a conflation of two desires. Okay, man is created to create. Now think back, and anybody watching this, think back when you've built something, you fixed something, you resolved a problem, you made something with your hands. You did something, right? And what you made was really good. And you looked at it and it filled your soul with gratification. You've experienced that, right? All men have. All right. The reason it fills our soul with gratification is because we were created to create. Man is a creative being. In the scriptures, we read the first thing God reveals to us about himself is that he is creator. In the beginning, God created. It's a verb, the heavens and the earth. Oh, God is creator. Well, so are you. You're created in the image and likeness of God. It's one of the attributes that lifts us from the rest of the creation. Everything, everything, you know, operates, lives according to its nature. A dog who is a dog glorifies God because he's living according to his nature. He's living according to the way God designed a dog to live. So when the dog wags his tail and runs around and chases the ball, God is glorified. Think about that, right? Anything that lives according to its nature glorifies God because everything that God created is good. All right. Man has the breath of God in him. Okay. What is this breath of God? This breath of God, God breathed into Adam and man became a living soul. The soul is the capacity to experience the very energy, the very life of God. Okay. That's what makes man different than an animal. Now, we share attributes with the animals because we come out of the dust of the ground. We come out of that which is spoken into existence. But out of everything that was spoken into existence, we also have the breath of God. So man is of the earth, and man is of the Spirit of God, because he did the breathing. All right? But that breathing is the capacity to receive the very life of God in ourselves. So some of our being represents, well, is analogous to animals. They have two lungs, they have two eyes, they have two ears, okay, just like man. But they also have that capacity to live in God and God in them. All right? That's our nature. Okay, that's our capacity. That's why man has all these problems, but the animals don't. Okay? And so what is that? Well, if God is creator, then so are we. God creates out of nothing. We create out of the stuff that is already created, but we create. Animals don't. They do things instinctively. I mean, you can still see the hand of God. Birds build nests, for example, right? But men write music, okay? Men speak. Men develop podcasts like yourself, all right? Animals can't do that. Animals can't do that. So it's a higher calling. Now, this need to create is there. Our soul desires it. And so when we create, that's when our soul is gratified. We have a need. Okay. What we are is expressed through desire. It's expressed through desire, the desires of our soul. And those desires need to be gratified. All right. Satisfaction comes when we work according to our nature, to God's grand design. I love St. Ephraim the Syrian. Now, we also have another creative desire, another creative energy, and that's a sexual. That's a sexual energy. But man's natural creative prowess and man's sexual energy have a different telos, a beautiful Greek word that incorporates both goal, purpose, and meaning, all in that one word. Okay? What happens then is this happens a lot in early adolescence. Okay? The desire to create gets pushed into the sexual desire, and two desires get tangled up. In a perfect world, the boy would have a mentor to guide him, and the father would say, or the uncle, The wise man would say, no, son, that's not the way you live. This is how you become a man, and would guide him and teach him. But the boy doesn't have that. The boy doesn't have that. A lot of boys don't have that. And so they're facing the challenges of life, challenges that have to be met in order for the boy to learn how to become a man. They face them. They don't have any help. They don't have any encouragement. They don't have any consolation when they fail, right? That they seek escape through the PMO. Okay. So what happens is the gratification that can come through the accomplishment of real work and success that man builds is seen is sought for through the orgasm. That's what happens. That's how man seeks to fulfill that emptiness in his soul. It starts young, gets habituated. The guy starts figuring out about like 15 or 16, this is a problem because he sees now that it's holding him back in some areas. I'm going to quit when I quit high school. At that point, it's a vice. He's entrapped. Okay? And so when that video went viral, I asked everybody who called me, I said, what was it? What was it about that video that compelled you to call me? And to a man, they all said, it's what you said about misplaced desire. What you said about misplaced desire, right? And so in that class, what we do is we untangle it. We untangle it. And a lot of guys they pull themselves out of the vice is broken, they pull themselves out of the habit. I forgot what the original question was. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, but I guess let me follow up with you on that then. What is the role of the sexual energy outside of procreation? Does it have another role in perhaps, I don't know, in the other sort of creativity, or is it that we should learn to tame our sexual desires, um,
Through,
and use them only for procreation? Like I'm trying to figure out how, like, what would be the role of that outside of procreation?
well, it's the sexual activity is appropriate only within the marriage relationship. Okay, let's put it that way. But that energy is still there. Okay, orthodox ascetical self-discipline. Okay, you take that energy and you direct it into creative work. All right. What I notice is that, and every guy notices this, as soon as they start applying that discipline, and we tell them how to do it, okay, what happens is, and this is always a little dangerous, when they really decide, okay, I'm gonna take this on. I'm gonna battle my PMO habit, okay, and I want to be delivered from it, and they start resisting. What happens is they feel this flush of creative energy, okay, because before that it's being dissipated through the PMO. Now they have it in it. What do they do with it? Okay,
Mm.
before they were dissipating it. But what do you do with it? Well, you've got to start ordering your life, properly ordering your life, so you have somewhere to direct that, and then you move into accomplishment. You move into progress. That's what happens. One of the first things that happens in I don't know how far we want to go into this, but when a guy starts getting serious about it, the first thing he'll notice is that, well, they don't notice it until I point it out. But I always ask them, how's your thinking? That their mind clears. They think more clearly. It's not muddled, right? Their thinking sharpens. There's a guy who, he overcame it, but he went 5 weeks without doing it. And I said, how's your mind? He says, I feel like I'm thinking 6 levels deep. See, that clarity comes. Clarity comes. The man becomes righteous. Now, what does righteous mean? I learned this from Father Stephen DeYoung. I love what he teaches. Um, to be righteous means to be rightly ordered. That's what it means, a rightly ordered man. And that's what St. Ephraim the Syrian says, make me whole, Lord, make me whole, heal me, so that I might I might understand your grand design. So I might learn where I fit in the ontological structure of the creation, right? That's right ordering. That's righteousness. And a man can start experiencing that. And you start experiencing that when you deal with the problems you got right in front of you that you got to deal with. Okay, you got to live in absolute reality here. Okay, no running away from the problems anymore. Facing the problems and start dealing with them. And then healing comes. So there was one guy, he was Orthodox for about 8 years. He had 3 kids, and he just could not get over the PMO. He just could not get over it. And he lived his life with his shoulders slumped and his head down. Right. And he decided to take the course. And there was some trauma in his life. Okay. So there was a compulsive element to all of this PMO addiction he had. And we healed the trauma. We healed the trauma through prayer. And, and after the prayer, he said, well, this is job. And then he went to the next sentence and went, well, let's go back to the job. And we talked about the job. And I said, well, do you want it? And he says, yeah. And then he gave me 5 reasons why he wasn't qualified. And I called him out on it. I said, I didn't ask you if you thought you were qualified. I asked you, do you want the job? And he goes, yeah. Okay. I said, you're going to apply for the job. I said, that's a direct order. You're going to apply for the job. So the night before the interview, he called me up and we prayed. St. John Maximovich is really good in this department, really good. And he went to the interview and he got the job. He got the job, right? There's a change that happened internally in the man, and it, the applying that discipline in his life and really like confronting the issue, right, fostered in him a self-confidence and a broadness of vision that he was afraid to apply. Well, he got the job. He called me up. He says, I got the job. He said, my income is doubling. He doubles his income overnight. He says, I can get out of debt. I can buy a house for my family. There's a transformation in this man. That's what I mean by creativity. Okay, that's what I mean by growth into deeper manhood. One of my favorite scriptures, and I'm conflating 3 here, but it's from Ephesians chapter 4. I quote this all the time because I love the book of Ephesians. I pray that you come to visions and revelations of the knowledge of him, of Christ, unto mature manhood, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. I mean, isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever heard? Well, that's healing, that's redemption. And I always, he says visions and revelations of the knowledge of him. I'm a little cautious with visions and revelations. A friend of mine says, no, you got to use it. But to me, it sounds really new agey, right? People are going to go into the new age area. So I say insights. I say God's going to give you insights about yourself and about the world. And that's exactly what happens as the healing begins. That's redemption. That's renewal.
You're not gonna believe me. I was actually looking at one of my videos today, and I was gonna respond to a comment, and I was looking for a particular, I think it was Saint Seraphim Osarov. The comment was something around like why online debating is actually good for Orthodoxy, and I was defending Christopher Lockwood, which I had an episode with, because he says that actually you should that debating online is a sign of spiritual immaturity, because he made the point that it's more important for you to live the spiritual life and to prepare yourself spiritually before you can go out there and debate. And I had gone online to find that quote from Saint Seraphim Osarov, but it also got Ephesians, the same one that you just quoted
Oh, really?
3 hours ago. And I'm a little bit in disbelief,
Yeah.
that those sort of, well, they're not coincidences, obviously. And I think that's another thing I wanna ask you about, because I feel that I have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, And one of the things that I've noticed more now is that as my spiritual life is changing, and as I continue to pray every day for God to work in through me and to purify my heart so that it may be able to be a throne for His Holy Spirit. And I know that's a road that I'm gonna walk the rest of my life. Um, but I've noticed that as I am doing that, that also changes their behavior. And that's the other thing I want to ask you about is, do you think that as men we have a calling to do that? And as we're going through these ascetic practices, do you think it's helpful to think of it not just something that we're doing for ourselves, but something that we're doing for other people as well? I would love to get your point on that.
100%, 100%, because we don't live in isolation. Okay, isolation is an aberration. Isolation is where the breakdown starts. This is why so many men are being driven to the church. Okay, they're driven by their need, they're driven by their pain. And so in this case, suffering is redemptive because it brings them to their pain, and their pain is because of their isolation. Okay, and the maladies that they suffer from, okay, the inadequacies, the PMO, and this and that. The root cause of that is isolation. All right, that's really what it is. And so my answer to that is it's 100%. You have to live in communion. Now, in your family, I'll tell you how to stabilize a family. I tell this to men all the time, especially if they're having trouble with their wives, right? I say, You get stable and your wife will get stable, okay? Your job is to be stable. If you get stable, your wife is going to draw your stability into herself by osmosis. You know, we guys, we always kind of we want to logic our wives into the faith. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Be a stable man, okay? And if you've got issues you need to work on, there's some things you don't bring to your wife. Bring them to other men. Your man issues are to be taken to other men. Men become a man from other men. Women can't do it. And I have to tell guys this a lot. I said, quit leaning on your wives as your emotional support. They can't bear it. They'll do it for a while, but in the end, they're going to break down. They're going to get angry. That's what's going to happen. Okay, so become stable yourselves. If you need help, you go to your priest. You go to a trusted friend, but it's got to be male. I tell guys, don't go to female therapists. You know, there'll be some exceptions. There's some exceptions to everything, but by and large, find a guy, and don't find an emasculated guy. Find a man. Okay, and then your wife will stabilize, and then your children will stabilize. That's how it works. And your children, especially your boys, draw it from you. Not when they're young, but when they start entering adolescence, that's when the bonding between the father and son is really important. Okay? Because he's going to draw from you as he grows from boyhood into an adulthood. Many of us did not have that. Okay? But nonetheless, we know that, and we know the pain and the dislocation that brings into our own lives, sometimes by our own hand and the stupid decisions we've made. Okay? But you can give your son a much better grounding. Much better grounding. He doesn't have to go through the pain and learn the stuff that you did because you've already given him the lesson. He's learned the lesson. So I think what you said is 100%, 100% accurate.
Well, the other thing I noticed, Father, is when I was growing up, especially in my adolescent years, I saw a lot of emotional instability from my father, and I think a lot of young men have seen it. It just didn't manifest itself in the same way that it does with a woman. In his case, it was a lot of anger and a lot of explosiveness.
Hmm.
And for a long time, I actually thought that's what was masculine, right? To have this like display of anger and no other emotion but that one.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the idea that I had of like how a man should sort of be, or what was manly. This sort of like ability to be very angry. And that took me a long time to unravel and to understand that that's really actually, I would actually say, a masculine expression of a very feminine type of man to have such a crazy emotional outburst. But I do want to ask you, do you think that there is a place for anger in a man? How necessary is that? And how do we learn to use that in a way that's contained and healthy?
Okay, so the scripture says, the Apostle Paul says, be angry, but don't sin. When I hear somebody say, "Oh, I've just got to get my anger out," what I hear is, here's a man. You hear it much more from a woman; they kind of tolerate it, but from a man, as a oh, here's a man who's really immature. He hasn't learned how to control his emotions. Men get hit by the feminists. Oh, you guys just compartmentalize everything. And I said, yeah, absolutely. God made us that way. Okay. Because we can have a big problem over here, but then we've got to do something over here, and we can set that aside and get done what needs to get done. Right. That's the way men are wired. And, and, and it's a gift. Okay. So when a guy says, "Oh, I just got to get my, my anger out," I think to myself, what are you, a woman? No. Come on. No, no. Be a man. Learn how to manage your emotions. Okay. Yeah, but I've got this anger. Then take that energy and apply it constructively. Men have the native capability to do that, so develop it. It's very simple, right? There's nothing worse than a guy just corking off because he's angry, and then you got to deal with his anger. You got to deal with his anger, right? So, so when a guy's angry, even if he's saying something that's true, frankly, it just kind of annoys me. I say, well, if you know what's true, cork the anger so I can deal with the truth. You're making it harder for me because I have to kind of like wade through your anger first. That's not manly. That's not manly. That's how I look at it, right? Now, if if I'm angry, somebody says something and I'm angry, I don't express that anger. I just don't express it. I figure, this is something I got to deal with. And I don't displace the anger on the person either. It's something that I've got to deal with. That it's just maturity. That's all it is.
And what are some practical ways you think that you can? Well, for example, what helped me a lot was a prayer that actually also Christopher, you might have been at that Zoom call that we had, because I asked him. So it's like, for example, there's certain people that really get under my skin, and I don't want to say something I don't mean. I don't want to express a certain. I don't want to just get into that pattern. But I also understand that these people have an ability, whichever whoever it is, to really get under my skin.
Hmm.
What I've learned to do, at least at the moment that I had that question for him, was to just separate myself. I cannot necessarily love them yet, but at this point, what I can do is keep my mouth shut and just separate myself. But he told me about a prayer that has helped me a lot, which is, I think, goes something along the lines of, "Thank God for giving me these angels that have shown me how far away my heart is from you."
Yeah.
And I've been repeating that as well as the Jesus prayer constantly whenever I feel a surge of anger. And I've noticed that over time, it's become a lot easier for me to see it coming, and to manage it, and to stay stable. What are some other practical steps you think
Well,
that men can take with their anger or even with lust?
I mean, something I've learned, and I've learned it the hard way, is that if I say something in anger, it's usually the wrong thing. So I've learned to keep my mouth shut. Okay. I've just learned to keep, I will feel the anger, but I will keep my mouth shut. And what I also do is whenever there's like a strong emotion there, I defer thinking about it until the temperature goes down. Okay. So even if there's an injustice occurring, that compels the anger, um, I wait until the temperature goes down and then I think it through and then I decide how I'm going to deal with it. Now, if it's a situation where okay, it it demands an immediate response, well, you kind of rely on your training, so to speak, and you go with that. You just go with that because it's probably the well, it is. It's the right way to handle it. You can't. It's real hard in the height of emotion to think clearly. So you either have to pre-think it about what you're going to do if it happens, or you go with your training. That's what you do. Other,
Also,
otherwise, things are going to spin out of control.
yeah, and they often, I mean, the worst decisions I've ever made in my life, I've made them emotionally.
Yeah, you made
Um,
emotional.
except except meeting my wife. That was the only one that I think was probably the best one.
Well, you
Um,
thought about that beforehand, though, right?
right. Well, yes and no, but yeah.
Well, you didn't fly off to Las Vegas or something, did you?
No, no, no. It wasn't that crazy.
Okay, all right.
um, Father, one other question I had. I know that we're running on time here, but so how do you like? I know there are a lot of men that have either brothers or they have sons. We sometimes have to discipline them.
Uh-huh.
What is the best way to discipline another man when he does something he shouldn't have done? And on the other side of that, as a man that's getting the discipline for doing something you shouldn't have done, how should you take that discipline as well?
Well, you're talking about what age are you talking about? Are you talking about your boys? Or are you talking about
I mean, for me personally, it would be my son, who's, I mean, he's still very young. He's only 3. But even with my brother, for example, he's like 18. I mean, and I think I would actually want to focus more on men around the age of my viewership, which is between 18 and 25,
uh-huh.
which are still in that sort of transitionary period.
Well, you know, I mean, generalizing is difficult, but if you're responsible, they got to know you're serious. Okay? They got to know you're serious. Whether or not they obey is ultimately up to them. You can't, you can't, I mean, you could coerce obedience, but the problem with coercion is that, you're not going to generate any love. I mean, you course if you arrest a guy because the guy's just crazy, that's coercion, and that you need to do because he's a threat to others. Okay, that's one thing. But if it's somebody that needs discipline, um, well, sometimes with guys, there's a time when they just got to know who's in charge. Okay, and they're going to provoke you. They're going to provoke you, right? But you can't act out of the provocation. Yeah, I mean you're gonna see this with kids. There's sometimes when they do something, you're really going to get angry, but you can't act out of the anger. It's just a kid. It's just a kid, right? And then you have to learn how you have to moderate yourself, but but they got to know that you're the boss. So, like my daughter, for example, was the best negotiator. And she just negotiated everything growing up. Well, what about this? What about that? What about the third thing? Right? She found every angle. And after a while, it just would wear you down, you know? And that's what she's trying to do. And I just said, it came to this. I would say, nope, it's going to be this. And my mind is made up. And there's no more negotiation. That's all I had to say. So I negotiated for a while because I knew she had to get it out of her. But as soon as I said, my mind is made up, all right, there was no more negotiation because she knew who was boss. I mean, once in a while she weasel things out of me, right? But there's some things you got to say no to, right? Things like that. Things like that. They will push you and they will test you, but of course they will because they have to find out where the real boundaries are. Okay. And you'll know where they are. You'll know where they are. You really can't do this, right? And you draw the line and you don't let them go over it. If they push, you're a brick wall. That's what it is. And then the thing is, they feel secure after that, even though they're testing you.
Which is ironic, right?
What's that?
Um, I was gonna say it's ironic, right? Because they're pushing to see if they can get away with it, but when they don't, it almost seems like they kind of need to not be allowed to get away with certain things.
Yeah, well,
Um,
they need to know that the walls are firm and some walls are immovable.
mhm,
They need to know that, but they learn through the testing. But we all learn through testing, okay? Like in our lives, God tests us because it's only through the testing that we become stronger. We can't think our way into strength. We're tested our way into strength. So
absolutely,
it's really in accordance to how things work. It really is.
absolutely. Father, I want to first of all thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
I think I'm so grateful to God that we made this happen, even though we had some hiccups there.
Yeah. No.
Because this was a conversation that I personally really needed, and I think a lot of young men need to hear. So thank you so much for that. Before I let you go, Father, is there anything you wanna leave the guys with, the gals with? Obviously, we'll link to the Brotherhood, just in case anybody's interested. But anything else you would like to add before I let you go today?
Yeah. It's the Orthodox faith and the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox faith contains the full measure of Christ. Now, Christ works everywhere. He hears everyone's prayers. Christ died for everyone. Okay, so I'm not a triumphalist here, and yeah, I pray for a lot of people, including Protestants, Catholics. You know, I prayed for a Muslim man. He had brain cancer, and the surgery went phenomenally well, right? And then I baptized him. He became Orthodox. Yeah, and but your Orthodox faith, it's the pearl of great price. It really is. Um, what Christ offers us and the fullness of Christ is within Orthodoxy, but we have to conform ourselves to the teachings of the church. Um, but the fullness of Christ is to be found in the Orthodox faith, but it's Christ who heals. It's Christ who heals, but your healing will come through your brothers and sisters in the church. It's a community, it's a living community. It's a very exciting time in Orthodoxy right now. If anybody hasn't read it yet, read Metropolitan Saba's address on the converts coming into Orthodoxy. He says, and I really agree with this, but he says that the era of Orthodox American evangelization has begun. And the next 10 years, and it's starting today, it's now, it's happening now. It's a very exciting time to be Orthodox. Um, so I encourage everybody, I mean, embrace Christ, but embrace Christ as is given to you in the Orthodox faith. You will experience him in his fullness. You will be healed, but in your healing, you will also become a light to others who are suffering, who are in despair, who are in hopelessness, who are wounded by, there's a lot of knives in this culture that are cutting up people. You will bring them to the faith. You will aid in their healing. That's what I want to leave everybody with.
Amen, Father. And my life is a testament to that as well.
Now,
Um,
I also, I'm going to, tonight, I'm going to pray for you. And I'm going to pray for this podcast. I think you're onto something good, and I wish you much, much success in it. And we measure success by bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to people who, in its fullness, right, to people who are searching for it. And I think my gut says you have a gift for that. So develop that. Okay?
Thank you, Father. That means a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Do it. Do it. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Father. Talk to you soon.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Bye.